Hello everybody and welcome back to Module 2. So what we're going to do here is just review some of the scientific literature out there on the ketogenic diet. And this is just a very brief review of some interesting articles that I have found kind of supporting the ketogenic diet. So first of all, the ketogenic diet originated many years ago, and in actuality there is actually some very early literature, medical literature out there that was using the ketogenic diet or low carbohydrate diet, high fat diet to help manage diabetes before there was insulin. So very interesting that it was a diet that has been used. And that was over 100 years ago. But it wasn't, well, I guess in the 60s, 70s, they've been using this diet for supporting intractable, kind of non-treatable seizures, and especially seizures in children. So this has been very important diet for many years, and it has a very big following for people who have seizures. And that's where a lot of our early research stems and sits. So a lot of the processes and how they developed the ketogenic diet have kind of come out of that. So this brings us to the brain, and the ketogenic diet has a lot of interesting properties on the brain, and mainly on neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitter is like a hormone. It allows our brain cells to communicate, talk to each other. Certain neurotransmitters may help you be more relaxed, and other neurotransmitters may help you be more excited. So it seems that in the brains of people on a ketogenic diet, we seem to have more of an increase in the hormone GABA, and or neurotransmitter GABA, and that produces a kind of a relaxation effect on the brain. GABA is also important in this area called the frontal cortex and the prefrontal cortex, and that's the area of higher level thinking. So very deep thinking, decision making occurs in this area, and GABA is required to be at nice levels in order to have enhanced thinking and planning and strategizing. So it also is very prominent in these internal areas of the brain, which is important for emotions. So we see GABA being very important for anxiety and decreasing an anxiety response and decreasing the fear response. We also see another change in the brain, and the other change is we seem to see a little less of the excitatory neurotransmitter. So the neurotransmitter that really excites people, excites the brain. So that makes sense that it may have some properties in seizures, because it actually reduces the level of that excitatory neurotransmitter. And then we go to the mitochondria. The mitochondria are in areas of our tissues that need a lot of energy. So they're in all our tissues, but they're more abundant in areas that need more energy. So our brain needs to be very energetic, needs more energy. So we have a lot of mitochondria packed into the brain, and we also have a lot of mitochondria packed into our kidneys, and we have a lot of mitochondria packed into our heart and muscle tissue as well. And this is very fascinating, but the mitochondria are like energy powerhouses. They are the power plants that we were describing in the previous lectures, showing the power plant. They make the energy for our tissues. They're also involved in the aging process, so that's something that's also fascinating, and they also help prevent against cancer. So a definition of aging, part of the biological definition of aging, is that we have a decrease in the number of these mitochondria and the mitochondria become a little aberrant, or they become a little dysfunctional after a while. It's kind of like a nuclear power plant that's kind of going into failing. And they become less efficient, and eventually they will explode, and when they explode, that leads to the cell death. And that's important because that's important at a certain age of our cell. We want it to die. We want it to, because we'll have another cell that will take over and repopulate. So that's why it's important for mitochondria health is important for prevention of cancer. It's because you want these mitochondria to work properly. You want them to die at the end of the life cycle of our cell, so that they don't continue on and become like tumor generating. So having properly functioning mitochondria is extremely important for our overall health, because obviously it makes energy, it leads to the cell destruction, and the renewal of new tissues. And the ketogenic diet really does support these mitochondria, because of the energetic demands, the energetic requirement, the energetic properties of ketones are so much higher than sugar. So we can produce so much more fuel. But there's also research that we may actually increase the number of mitochondria. And that's important because a lot of these neurodegenerative conditions, one of the hallmarks is we also see a decrease in energy and mitochondria. And we want to have these mitochondria functioning as well as possible. The ketogenic diet seems to also support antioxidant production. So that is something that is fascinating and exciting. And it allows us to produce our own antioxidants. So in this research article, they reviewed all the kind of literature to look at the mechanism by which we turning on antioxidants. So an antioxidant is something that destroys tissues, that wrecks tissues. Sorry, an oxidant is something that destroys tissues. It's kind of like a bully or a bulldozer going into a room and kind of trashing a room. And an antioxidant is the opposite of an oxidant. It helps repair the damage. So we want to we're always going to have oxidative damage. We're always going to have damage occurring to our tissues, but we need what defines healthy tissue is the ability to repair that damage almost immediately after it occurs. But when there's a time, there becomes a time when the oxidative damage may outweigh the antioxidant damage, and then we may get permanent damage occurring in the tissues. And the ketogenic diet, what it does, or at least they propose here, is that it may lead to a little bit of oxidative damage at first. Oxidative products are things like hydrogen peroxide. And what it does is it turns on our antioxidant genes. One is NRF2. That then goes right in and into our cell nucleuses, right down to the genetic blueprint of our cells. And it gets it to turn on this gene called ARE. And it turns on an antioxidant response. So an antioxidant that it may turn on internally is something called glutathione. And that is a very, very important antioxidant. It is one of the central antioxidants in our pathways. It is one that we make ourselves. And we use other antioxidants, other nutrients, and plant vegetables, and other nutrients such as vitamin C and alpha-lipoic acid. They all kind of come on, they all help to produce this main master antioxidant called glutathione. We don't absorb glutathione from our diet, we do have to make it. We make it from things like N-acetylcysteine, which is an amino acid. Amino acid is also found in things like whey protein. But interestingly, we have to get the individual components of glutathione and make it. And on the ketogenic diet, it seems to be after about 1 week, we have this genetic increase in our genes associated with antioxidants. And that is truly amazing. If this is happening, this is the mechanism by which it could be truly anti-aging. Because essentially, when you age, you get more oxidative damage, and if we can produce more antioxidants, we can counteract that oxidative damage and repair the tissues and restore tissues. So this becomes a restorative diet as well. So this is truly amazing. The research is still quite early on in the stage, but the biochemists and cell biologists are all looking at this pathway to see how this has an effect. So this is just a summary of this article, and just showing all the ways the ketogenic diet can influence the brain and energy requirements. So here it actually they're actually talking about that it may enhance communication pathways in the brain, so it may make our neurons more able to talk stronger. It may increase energy through the mitochondria, and it may increase our natural antioxidant pathways. And all these are so important for healthy brain function, healthy heart function, aging. And so this brings us to, is this a good diet for conditions of neurodegenerative conditions? And, you know, there's still a little research to be done to determine if the ketogenic diet is, but they're showing promising research out there. And we know that MCTs, they enhance ketone production. So that's one way to enhance the ketone production. These are medium chain triglycerides. They are absorbed very, very quickly into the bloodstream, and they fuel these and are converted by the liver to make these ketones. And the higher ketone values, so we can increase, but when you become keto adapted, and we'll talk about this in a future video, you have the ability to take your MCTs and then make your own natural ketones. So as you take them, you actually can measure this in the blood. Your ketones, called beta hydroxybutyrate, that'll increase in your blood very, very quickly on someone that is keto adapted. And they were finding that when Alzheimer's patients took the MCTs, they increased the ketones, and they had an improvement in memory and recall. So it's very promising. There's the research article there if you want to look at it. Very promising stuff out there. So this potentially could be a potential therapeutic diet. Now, I will talk more about this in future classes, because these are all presentations in themselves. The other area is Parkinson's disease, and we're starting to see that maybe through mitochondrial enhancement and through the glutathione pathway that we discussed, the enhancement of glutathione, that may help with Parkinson's disease. So it's still, the jury's out, we don't really know, but it's another area that could be investigated. And most importantly, the diet is fairly safe in most people, especially when guided with a healthcare practitioner that really understands this diet and really understands what a good, healthful, ketogenic, well-balanced ketogenic diet looks like. So there's not really a lot of harm when you do this in a proper way. So that's pretty powerful, and you think it could enhance quality of life at the very least for this group. So this is the area where most amount of the research is kind of focused on humans, and that's in metabolic syndrome and diabetes. And essentially, I like to back it up one more step and say that the ketogenic diet is probably affecting mostly insulin. And insulin is a precursor to metabolic syndrome. That's when we become insulin resistant. We no longer can use our insulin properly. And remember, insulin moves sugar into the tissues from the blood. So it reduces our blood glucose levels, our blood sugar levels. But as we produce more and more insulin, our tissues begin to become desensitized to insulin, and we need more and more insulin to trigger the entry of glucose into the cells. And we eventually, over time, over many years, insulin levels get very, very high, and then at the very last stage of the disease that's occurring in diabetes, kind of later stage diabetes, we just stop producing insulin, and then you have a problem and you need insulin injections. So we want to prevent that as much as we can, but we don't often talk about insulin resistance in relation to other health problems like heart disease, cancer, for example, and weight gain. So this could be an underlying function of all these, a common denominator between all these conditions. So we often see things in improvements in blood glucose levels, blood sugar levels. The bad cholesterol tends to drop. The good cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, increases. I would say the HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, tends to increase the most, and it leads to a much better ratio between the good and the bad, and that's the most studied kind of marker of heart health, is the ratio between the good cholesterol and the bad cholesterol. So we can get that down with a ketogenic diet. And we see all these things like reduced blood pressure in people that are really in people with metabolic syndrome and diabetes. What's important to note here is that if you have diabetes, you really should be monitoring your blood sugar, because obviously the ketogenic diet does lead to hypoglycemia, and if you're on any sort of diabetic medications, you can be at a big risk of some problems if you plummet your blood sugar really quickly without modifying your dose. So please do work with a healthcare provider to monitor your blood sugar levels when you're on the ketogenic diet if you have diabetes.